For our second pairing, we've hopped across the pond. We are now in Nottinghamshire, if I said that right, England, with Colston Bassett Creamery. And they've been making cheese like the Stilton for over 100 years, since 1913. Stilton is, as you've noticed, a blue cheese. It is one of the only, I think it's the only protected origin cheese in England. So in France, we have our AOPs, which are cheeses that have been given protected status, which means they have to be made in a certain way, from a certain breed of animal, from a certain radius, the milk has to come from. So Stilton is kind of the same thing, but in England. So for blue cheese, for those of you who haven't tuned in before or who need a refresher, it's made a bit differently. So there's actually a mold culture called Penicillium roqueforti. So you heard that right. The word Roquefort is also the name of a blue cheese found here in France. So it's actually added to the milk with the rennet. So during the coagulation process, it's all integrated, which means that when the cheese is finally, set in its mold and has its shape, after a few days of aging or a few weeks, it's pierced all over with what you can imagine look like knitting needles. They're stainless steel and they pierce the cheese all over, which allow oxygen to enter the cheese, reacting with this bacteria, the Penicillium roqueforti, edible. It's not a dangerous bacteria. And that's what makes the blue lines. They're actually called veins. And that's where the bacteria has reacted with the ambient oxygen to create that salty blue flavor. So the reason we picked this cheese is because the Petit Verdot is a big wine. So for a big wine, you need a big cheese. So going back to the last question we had is, how do you pick big wine? We couldn't do something like a brie. A brie would just be overpowered by the wine. The wine would just be too tannic, too juicy, and the brie would just get lost and just kind of be fudgy in your mouth and not really do much for the product. So we've chosen a blue because of the saltiness, because of the richness of the Stilton. So not only is it salty, but it should be a little bit fudgy, a little bit creamy. And that creaminess should pair really well with the tannins and evoke kind of dark berries, blackberries, and not get lost in this pairing. So that's what I have for the cheese. So we'll turn it back to the wine, give you guys a moment to taste the cheese, smell it, look at it, and get it on your palate before we move into the wine portion.
So hopefully everyone has had the wine open a little bit and letting it breathe and aerate and open up. It's still considered a quite young red wine. Petit Verdot is one of our top varieties here in Virginia. And we say that because it's consistent. It really produces each year, whether rain or heat, a good crop and a high quality red wine. So that's for us very important. The wines, like I said, that really are the best come from grapes that are grown, and the wine is made in the vineyard. We have to do very little. We have such good grapes. It's really just this easy transition from juice to wine that we look to do. And if we have to start working with underripe grapes or diluted grapes, then it becomes a challenge. But Petit Verdot is one of our most consistent varieties. This is the 2016 Petit Verdot. Originally, this grape is more known for being a blending grape in the Bordeaux region of France, one of the Bordeaux varietals that are blended with Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and others. And up until recently, it was really only known as a blending grape because it's a high acid grape variety. It's almost two extremes here between the Chardonnay and the Petit Verdot. The reason, as I mentioned, I don't like to have Chardonnay from this part of Virginia because it's too hot and we lose acidity. But Petit Verdot is traditionally a variety that has high acid and sometimes too much acidity. And this heat and ripening actually helps us to bring in a more balanced grape with just the right amount of acidity, but not too much. And so instead of having to use it as a blender, which we do and many wineries do make blends with it, we're able to produce a single varietal wine because it is balanced. And not only that, it's one of the varieties here in Virginia that really tends to be our heaviest in terms of weight and tannins and structure of all the varieties that we grow and make in Virginia. There's some others like Tannat and in some areas maybe Cabernet Sauvignon, but consistently Petit Verdot is one of our most structured, tannic, astringent varieties that lend itself to long-term aging as well as blending. And so it's one of definitely the main blending grape in Virginia, but a lot of us, produce it as a single varietal because in the way it ripens here, it's more balanced. So having said that, the one thing about Petit Verdot is always has just incredible color, beautiful color. And for me, this varietal is different than the Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon varieties that are more traditional Bordeaux varieties. This has a very different aromatic profile than those grape varieties, which I think is unique. As Hannah said, you get more dark blackberry notes. For me, a little more earth and leather characteristics. When it's young, you get some violets, where those other varieties are more traditionally more your cherry, raspberry, a little bit brighter red fruit varieties. And so this has a kind of a unique, distinctive characteristic that separates itself from the other Bordeaux varieties. This wine is made, we make all the reds here, same way as a Chardonnay in terms of no yeast additions to it, let it ferment on its own, but it's made in more of a traditional method, old world style, where we put the grapes in the tank, partially, well, destemmed, and we let them macerate for several days before the fermentation starts. We let the fermentation start up slowly, and then through a month-long fermentation process, and then we let the grapes macerate on the skins post-fermentation, which helps, again, all this is doing is building a bigger, more complex wine. And then this wine goes into French oak barrels, of which 50 to 60% of it's brand new each vintage, but it's aged for up to 24 months, almost 2 years in barrel. This vintage was aged 22 months in barrels. So that long-term aging really helps to add the complexity from the oak into the wine. It also allows the wine to evolve a lot better in the barrel, that extra time in the barrel, and then is bottled and then aged at least a year in bottle before we release it. So again, the 2016 vintage is our current vintage, which is still quite young. You know, Petit Verdot, really for me, 7 to 10 years is ideal for a Petit Verdot till it really changes, evolves, and really integrates the oak until it's more expressive. But it's a wine you can drink now. Obviously, it's a little more rustic in style, more tannins. So you need a big, meal with it, or a strong cheese, such as this cheese. I mean, it's really, when we tasted the pairing, it's ideal. The intensity of the cheese really helps balance out with the tannins and the structure. I think the cheese, the texture, the grittiness a little bit, also the richness of it really helps to tone down the Petit Verdot, and really, I think it's a great pairing. For us, it was a very easy pairing to come up with. So, any questions on the Petit Verdot?
We're getting lots of positive reactions in the chat about the pairing and about the Petit Verdot. I had the Petit Verdot and a blue at a previous Michael Schaps, Hannah Schaps pairing, and I like this Stilton with it even better, Hannah. It's a really great choice.
Thanks, Janine. Yeah, the difference between this is a cow's milk, and the last time we tried with the Roquefort, so I think this is a little bit softer.
Okay.
It's good to know that it also stands up well.
Yeah, well, hopefully everyone, in terms of the Petit Verdot, it really, as I mentioned with the Chardonnay, same thing as it needs to open up in the glass. For me, it's changed. I've had this open now for about an hour, and it really just starts to bring out more of the fruit notes, and the palate also is kind of rounding out and getting a little bit softer as it aerates, more expressive, more fullness on the palate. So it's really important to let these wines open up and give a chance to express themselves.
So we have a chat question that says, why do you think Virginia wines aren't as well known as other states like Oregon? I think the wines are just as good, if not often better. I think they're better too. And we're hoping to get the word out through events like this. We now have an audience from Charlottesville Ballet people, as well as Schaps people, as well as people that just enjoy wine and cheese and a good cause. So please tell people how great these wines are.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of the industries are very different between Oregon and for now. It's changing. It's always changing. We're getting more distribution in other states, and then there's a few wineries that have distribution outside of the Mid-Atlantic. But it's really, Virginia industry has traditionally been an agritourism industry where, we have all this history and tourism. And so most of the wineries are smaller, family-run wineries, and they can sell everything right out of their front door because of all the tourism. And so they're smaller scale. The Oregon winery is a bigger commercial industry with national distribution, much bigger production. And it's, you know, there are some wineries here in Virginia that are moving towards that level. And I think it's just a matter of time till we have wineries getting more national distribution. I've been, you know, had inquiries from lots of states, and I just don't have the production right yet. And it's part of it's a shortage of vineyards too. We just don't have enough grape production to get us there.
All right. Well, we have a question specifically about Petit Verdot. Is it now commonly drunk as a single varietal, or is it mostly blended? It's a little glass of water, Petit Verdot.
That was a mistake I made before. I used to say that it was that too, a petit verre d'eau, a little verre d'eau, but I'm not sure that's accurate.
I don't think so either. I think Verdot might be a place name, but because it's spelled different.
I really need to
The
tell
dough
people
part
that.
is spelled differently than the water part in French. I just thought I enjoyed the pun.
No, but it's actually in Virginia. It's a bit of a mix of both. I mean, the varietal, you know, when I started making wine here in the 90s, there was no Petit Verdot as a varietal. Whatever little bit we had was a blender. I think I made for one of my clients the first varietal Petit Verdot in 2002. I made my first one in 2005, and it's been growing ever since. Where now I would say there's definitely more production of varietal Petit Verdot than blending in Virginia. But I would probably think overall worldwide it's more of a blender than a varietal. So it's hard to find a lot of varietal Petit Verdot from other regions.
We have a question. Do you live in Charlottesville or France? Michael lives in Charlottesville, but spends a lot of time in France, and Hannah is living in France.
That's correct.
Yeah, I just got back from 3 weeks in France, and that was my third trip to France since August. But it was actually the second longest I've been away from France from September to January. So normally I'm in France every other month, but for shorter time frame, about 10 days at a time. But since I hadn't been able to go back since harvest, this was a big transition for a lot of things going on in France. So I was there for 3 weeks, which was a long time for me.
Okay, well, we have one question about impacts on the business from COVID, the pandemic, everything. Obviously, there's an impact in that we're doing this by Zoom and not in person, but doing it by Zoom enables people to join from all over the country and the world. So anyway, maybe a word or two about the impact.
Yeah, I could see some of the questions. Fortunately, the question was about Hannah getting back to your apartment tonight, but you're staying at the house, right?
No, I just have, how many witnesses do I have here? I think I have like 40 witnesses. No, when I drove here, I was okay. And I have a document that says I should be, you know, I'm working for the business, and therefore I should in theory have permission. I was stopped last night, thankfully right outside of my other workplace. So the police drove by and we were asking us what we were doing standing outside. But we told them we're leaving work to go home. I did not go home. I went to some friends' houses, but they don't need to know that. So we have a curfew at 6 p.m. and so it's been a bit tricky, and they're talking about going back to a full lockdown like we had in November. So it's not easy, but I think the French and I guess myself, we're learning to live with it and all the rules to hope that things get better.
Well, on that note, I will keep a record of the chat and share the comments in the chat that I have not been able to moderate. But Hannah really should be getting home. We have 60 witnesses to you here tonight. So, you know, let them know. And you can tell them the moderator speaks French. So if they want to take it up with her, feel free. And I want to thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Michael, we're also going to let you go because one thing I've done a lot of my life is travel internationally, and I know what jet lag can be like. We are going to I want to just take the opportunity to thank Michael and Hannah and Christy, and for their wonderful work in bringing this wonderful event to us. This has been great. The tastings are always so fun and so informative, and I learned so much about the cheese as well.